for very long, for the United States to completely change its relationship with the rest of the world. That's the importance of this. And Lyndon LaRouche and Helga Zepp-LaRouche often talked about a dialogue of civilizations in contradistinction from the British policy, which was called bringing out the pig. And what the British meant by that is they would send all these anthropologists and archaeologists to nations and dig up whatever was the worst in their history, whenever they were the most backward and destructive, whether it was cannibalism, witchcraft, warring, invading other countries. And they would put that up on high and say, this is your culture. We have just discovered that your culture is based on fasting for 7 days a week. And that kind of thing is very efficient at wiping out entire populations, as opposed to looking at what other cultures have actually contributed to civilization, how we got to the point that we are at. What were the contributions of China, of Ibn Sina, Al-Farabi, the Islamic Renaissance, the Baghdad Caliphate? What were the contributions of the ancient Greeks, the ancient Egyptians, the Tagore, or ancient civilizations in India? That if you look to the best of each culture, what you find is an area where you're approaching universal principles. And that is where we have to be. And I think there's a great deal of basis for that in this region, which people might not think of. So John Sigerson, who people probably know as the director, the co-director and director of the Schiller Institute Chorus, who is guiding many of us through the difficult terrain of Beethoven's Missa Solemnis, is going to be taking us on a tour of this history. And I will say that he is not returning from combat, but just had a small medical procedure. So you'll see the little Band-Aid on his forehead. But John, go ahead.
Thank you, Diane. I first just wanted to say that I'm not an expert in this area of what I'm presenting here is things that I found out over the last few weeks just because I was curious about the situation. It started when I was looking at this book, which a friend of mine, Bill Salisbury, gave to me. And it pointed out that this area of Central Asia, which includes, sorry, hold on, I've got to do a screen share here in order to do this. Let me screen share now. Wait. Okay, here we go. Okay, you can see the book now. So this is the book that I was, it pointed out that this whole area was known as the land of 1,000 golden cities. And that really struck me because I said, well, gee, I mean, usually you think of Afghanistan as maybe a bunch of nomadic tribes going around and so forth. And that it's, they're all just these tribes warring against each other. But it turns out that that's completely not the case, that it didn't have to be the case, that this area has an incredibly rich potential, as David just mentioned, in terms of the Helmand River, but also just in general. It's the kind of place where these 1,000 cities were oases. Because the water is scarce, but there's still a lot of water there. And I just the way I want to start out by this is showing you, I mean, this is without any borders or anything. People always look at the borders. And here you have just this whole area, like as if you were traveling orbiting in space and looking down over this area. So you don't see the borders. You just see these areas, and you probably wouldn't see the rivers so clearly as they're delineated here. But I think that's useful just to point out some things in case people are not familiar with this area. This is the Caspian Sea. That's the Mediterranean over there. That's the Black Sea here. Right. And then here you have this body of water that is called the Aral Sea, and I'll mention a few funny things about that. And then the Persian Gulf is here, right? And this is the Red Sea, and then this is the Arabian Gulf here. So we're talking about this area basically right here that I'm going around here, that area. And also you see this river going down here. That's the Helmand River that David was talking about. And then you have the Aral Sea. You have these rivers coming out of it, but actually what's going on is these rivers are going into it. This is what now is known as the Amu Darya River. And this was the Sir Darya River, which, and the Amu Darya used to be known as the Oxus River, O-X-U-S River. And you can see all these come through these mountainous areas, all of the sources. These mountains up here that I'm saying, there's called the Pamir Mountains. And then down here, this is generally known as the Hindu Kush, which straddles what is now Afghanistan and northern Pakistan. And then down here, as you get down to this area here, that's the Himalayas. So you're familiar with the Himalayas. And then this is the Indus River. This whole system here going down here, that's the Indus. And you can see all of it comes up from these mountainous areas here. There are also some or down here. Let me say something about the water. So water is very, very important with this. And the reason why you had 1,000 cities is because they knew how to manage their water and deal with it very, very efficiently. Just to give you an idea, let me just show you here. Also, some of this is very desert area. This area right here, it's known as the Karakum Desert. It's now it's mostly in what's called Turkmenistan. And let me show you another satellite view of that desert, just to give you an idea here. There we go. This is the Karakum Desert here. Again, this was the Pamir Mountains over here. And look at that. That was the so-called Aral Sea, but as you can see, what's going on there? Doesn't look like there's much sea there. It's just a few little black things. And indeed, one of the problems that we have today is that this whole Aral Sea, and then the Amu Darya is this river going right down like this, right along there, right? And then this is Afghanistan down here. And then this is Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan here, and then Tajikistan. Those are the three stands. And then Kyrgyzstan is up here. And then, so this whole area has dried out. It used to be a really nice sea, as you can see from that thing. It used to look like that, right? And now it's just barely. Now, what happened? Actually, that's only happened. It's similar to what's happened in Lake Chad, in Africa. And of course, the LaRouche movement has been very instrumental in trying to refill the Lake Chad basin in Africa. And here it's a similar situation. What happened is that in the Soviet era, the Soviets got very excited about using this basically as a source of water, and also these rivers as a source of water for a lot of agriculture here. And similar to what David was saying, and what happened is that what they ended up doing is over-farmed this whole area around here, and with a lot of cotton. They're growing a lot of cotton, which really sucks up a lot of water. And so over the years, this thing got smaller and smaller and smaller. And so now this sea is barely a city at all. There's a couple little lakes there, but that's about it. It used to be sort of a little bit salty, but not like the Dead Sea or something. I mean, you had fishing in it and so forth. And of course, as the sea shrank and it got sucked down, you couldn't it got extremely salty, and it would kill people. Anybody who tried to drink, the animals that tried to drink the water would die, and so forth. So that the place has really suffered, and there have been some very small efforts to try to get it better, but it's still not. There's a lot of work to be done. One of the grand projects that really should be done, it's very similar to Nawapa in the United States. We're bringing the waters down from Canada into the dry western areas of the U.S. Here, the idea is also to take waters from way up north and to canal them down into this area to refill this area, which is a very important project to be done. Okay, so now let's just look at the history of this whole area a little bit. Let's go all the way back to, say, maybe 540 BC. Okay, so this is the period where you had, let's see, you had Cyrus the Great, the Persian, this is the first Persian empire, the so-called Achaemenid Empire, and it was in 600, around 530 BC, around that time. And then after him, he was followed by Xerxes, who reigned around 486 to 465 BC. That was after they had invaded Babylon. So Babylon was actually part of this also. So we're looking at, though, this area around here called Bactria, which they took over. This area is this area of of these 1,000 cities. Let me just show you a little bit. Let me see. Let me just show you a little bit about where Bactria, just to give you an idea here. Let's look at this. There's Bactria, right? So here's the Pamir Mountains. As you can see, here's the Amardaya or the Oxus River coming in here, and then all these cities here. Right now, every one of these cities had this incredible irrigation system, and unlike the Russians, when in the modern day, when they were just sort of farming the area, they were just basically pouring the water in and then getting farming. What these guys did is they knew how to manage the water. They had incredible gardens, but they were all raised above the level of the land in order to prevent salinization. They had incredible water works. Let me show you, and let me show you a friend of mine, Karol Varekin, actually wrote an article, which I will then share with you. Hold on a second. I have to change my share here. Got to share a different screen. Let's see this one. There you go. All right, so this is Karol Varekin, who's an associate of Lyndon LaRouche in Europe, and he wrote this article just recently, as you can see, mostly after I spoke about this. And here's they had these incredible irrigation tunnels. This is just one of them, and they were called kanats. Sounds similar to the word canal, and I think that's definitely the case. And I wanted to point out, here's another one. And here's the way it worked. These were gravity-based water systems where you would take you can see, you take it from someplace that's a little bit higher and the water table is a little bit higher. And then they would drill down and have these tunnels here. And then that would go down into the area that would be irrigated. But also, this is just very simplified, because what they would also have is underground tunnels, many of them underground tunnels. One of the major cities that we're going to be talking about, which is a city called Merv, which is now in Turkmenistan. It was an incredibly complex irrigation system that goes back to probably the second millennia, or possibly even the third millennia BC, that they had worked. They developed these over thousands of years, even before the Persians came or anything. And they would have these are populous cities, and they had an entire little army of people who were dealing, maybe 1,000 people whose main purpose was to maintain these irrigation systems. Not only that, but they had divers. They had a corps of divers who could go down and do the work underwater on these various systems. Incredibly developed thing. I also wanted to point out that later on, where is it? Oh, I missed it. Just one second. Thought I had it. Okay, one of the things that Carol points out is that these oases, an oasis is a man-made thing. It's not, these oases are not, they happen because people were there to had develop the technology in order to do it. They didn't just naturally occur. Here's another one of these tunnels here. I'm looking for this quote that I've got, which I cannot find. Hold on a second. There it is. Okay. I just wanted to point this one sentence out. In April 7, 1973, Lyndon LaRouche's friend, the French Iranian professor and his historian Ali Mazaheri, who died in 1991, published his translation from Arab into French, The Civilization of Hidden Waters, a treatise on the exploitation of underground waters, composed in the year 1017 by a Persian hydrologist. So, and these are pictures of the plans that he had for these kinds of things. So these were great scientific works, and as things moved along, the sophistication of how they could calculate water flows and things like that were a major factor in them developing the most advanced mathematics of the time, including various trigonometry principles that had to be discovered in order to deal with these things. Okay, let's go back now. Let's go back to Bactria again. Okay, I just want to point out here. No, actually, let's pull back a little bit. Let's pull back to this. Gives you a better sense of it. Here you have something called transoxania, and that's sort of a generic term for this area around the Oxus River. It's useful, but you can see, and that you have these two areas here: the Fergana Valley, which is also now part of Tajikistan, I think, and then you have this whole area here, which is where the Oxus River comes down, and then there's the Hindu Kush, and there's Kabul. You can see all the way down there. That's the capital of Afghanistan. So you can see that, and then you have these cities like let's see, where's the one that I'm looking at? Yeah, Marv. There's right. And it's MARW, but it's a lot of, and nowadays it's called Mahdi, but back then it was called Merv, MERV. And this was an incredibly developed city. Just to give you one little tiny bit of an idea of that, hold on a second. And it was a complete crossroads. This is on the Silk Road, of course. People, they had markets and everything, but they also even had air conditioning. And that's what I want to point out here. Here's their air conditioning. This was in the 7th century, but it probably goes back. But what they would do is they would take ice from the mountainous areas that I showed you, bring huge amounts of ice down in here, and so people could go in here to cool off. So it was a really amazing kind of technology that they had in this area. They were you had this area, Khwarazm, up here. Let me show you a little bit of better Khwarazm. Here, let me see. There's the Aral Sea, and this was the area of all the cities around Khwarazm. And Khwarazm was the place where the famous mathematician, which is usually known as an Arab mathematician, but he was really from Central Asia here, Al-Khwarazmi or Al-Khwarizmi, came from. And he ended up going to Baghdad, but this is where he came from. And if you're not familiar with him, he was one of the major map makers. He was the first person who created a map which included both the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean as open, as shown them as open seas rather than enclosed lakes. But he was a very pivotal person, and he where was I at? He oh yes, and he's famous, so famous that a crater in the moon has been named after him. It's on the other side of the moon, on the outside of the moon, but there is a Khwarazm crater there to give you an idea of him. Going back to Bactria, just to point out here, you've got Samarkand, you can see there, and let's go to the other one. Here, yeah. All of these places where you had Bukhara, for instance, that's the birthplace of the famous Ibn Sina, who also came from this area. The point that this book makes, and that I was looking at, and that I think it's well established, is that almost all of the people who were the major scientists who ended up during the Arab era, they all came from this area. Most of them did not actually come from the area around Baghdad. So this was sort of the core thought think tank, area for the entire thing. Al-Farabi, for instance, the famous philosopher, he came from even further up north, even above where this map is. So give you an example of the kinds of things with that. So what happened is that Alexander came in, and Alexander came in and on this is Alexander the Great. He invaded this whole area and took it away from the Persians in around 329 BC. At that point, he met people in this area who already spoke Greek and were basically Greek. Now, how could that have happened? Well, it turns out that what happened is that even further back, Xerxes, when the head of the Persian Empire there, whenever he found any Greeks on the western end, because they were trying to invade Greece, whenever he found some Greek colonies and so forth that were giving him trouble, he would exile them to this area, right, to this Transoxania area, and say, no, you can't. So he would uproot whole villages and send them out here. So by the time that Alexander got here, there were already whole Greek-speaking communities in this area. So he founded many of these cities, and let me just give one example here. Again, let's go back to Bactria. Okay. Right. And here's this place, Al-Qanum. In Al-Qanum, which was a complete Greek city with a Greek amphitheater, which held 7,000 people. During that time, during the Greek period, the plays of Aristophanes and so forth would be performed there. So you had that, and then it was a kingdom which was called the Greco-Roman, Greco-Bactrian kingdom. And let me just see, here is the map. Come on here. Oh, here we go. Well, Bactrian map. Oh, here it is. Yeah, this is Eucratides the first, who reigned in the first century AD, the second century AD, BC, for many periods in their time. And you can see this is basically Greek art. This was from a coin that was minted there. They were minting very rich gold coins. Just give you another idea of another place in that area. Right there. Right. This was a kind of a medallion in a place called Begram, which was also founded by Alexander. You give an idea of the Greek. You see, this is basically Greek art that you can see here from this area. Incredibly rich. So basically what I want to, the point that I want to make in this, and I don't want to go through a long period of maybe we can talk a little bit more about the history of the Arab period, but the Greek, what essentially happened is that this Greek area was overrun at a certain point. Then further on, this area was taken over by in the second century AD. It was taken over by the so-called Sassanid Empire, which was this was before Muhammad, right? So, but it was a Persian type of. It may have called it the Second Persian Empire, and that's when they started translating huge amounts of the Greek writings, and you had entire colonies of Greek writers that occurred during that time. That Sassanid Empire was then taken over by the Arab, the Muslim Empire, starting in around the 7th century. A lot of things were destroyed during the early parts of that invasion. So there are many writings that were actually lost at that point, many libraries that were destroyed. But after a while, the Muslim caliphs sort of changed. And rather than just think, they at the first, when they were going to try to convert everybody to do the kind of thing that you think that the Taliban sort of were doing, is that trying to convert anybody and killing everybody who wouldn't convert. But they realized that really wasn't going to work, and instead they actually started bringing in these same kinds of translators and creating an extremely rich culture that occurred, which sort of had the culmination in the era of the so-called Abbasids, which was around the same time as Charlemagne in Europe. That is around 800. Charlemagne was crowned in 800 AD, and Harun al-Rashid was the caliph at that point, and he was followed by Mamun, who was also very much patron of the arts, and they had entire armies of intellectuals and so forth translating stuff. And all of those people who these caliphs brought in from to Baghdad. Keep in mind that Baghdad was only founded in about 670 or something like that. AD. So it was a rather new city, but they brought people in, and but almost all of these intellectuals that they brought in were from this whole area in Central Asia. They were not really Arab in that sense. They wrote in Arabic because that was the lingua franca, it's franca, but it was not. In many cases, that wasn't their native language. It was these languages of further east. I want to end it there. I'm sorry if I'm a bit scattered about this, but it's a huge amount. The main thing is that there's an incredible amount to discover, richness to discover in this area. And one thing that point that it's very clear is that the only way you have to look at this as a whole area. You can't look at it as just a specific nation. So that when we're talking about Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan and Afghanistan all pulling together, that is the only way that you're going to develop this area. And if we can develop it with mutual tolerance and mutual respect, which is, I think, what is being discussed now. If we're able to do that, then we do have a really golden chance to once again make this into an area of maybe even many, many thousand golden cities. Thanks.
Great.